One moment, I was the architect who held the company together. The next, a younger COO with a shiny MBA smiled at me like I was outdated equipment and told me I wasn't aligned with their new direction. After 28 years of loyalty, they pushed me out in front of everyone, quiet, humiliating, like I was supposed to disappear without a sound. But they never bothered to ask who actually owned the foundation they were standing on. They'd find out soon enough. If you want the full story, stay with me and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. I walked into that conference room believing it would be another routine strategy update. Maybe even a conversation about the next phase of the platform I'd spent nearly 3 decades perfecting. Instead, Brianna Cole, our brand new COO with her polished smile and manicured ambition, sat across from me like she had already decided I was a problem to eliminate. She didn't offer a greeting, not even a nod. She just tapped her pen against a folder with my name on it and said, "Let's talk about alignment." Alignment. That word hit harder than any direct insult. After 28 years of building Nova Shield's core protection engine, mentoring half the engineering team, and carrying the company through outages, failed deployments, and client crises, I was suddenly a misaligned variable in her spreadsheet. She kept going, using the same corporate nonsense executives lean on when they're too inexperienced to speak plainly. "Your contributions have been solid," she said, glossing over nearly 3 decades of sacrifice as if she were evaluating a summer intern. "But the industry is moving fast, and we need agile, adaptable leadership, fresh perspective." Fresh perspective. Translation: younger, cheaper, easier to push around. She didn't know a single line of code. She didn't understand the architecture she was supposedly modernizing. But she had an MBA, trendy buzzwords, and the confidence of someone who had never been humbled by real responsibility. When she slid the termination folder toward me, she didn't even look up, just pointed with her pen like I was expected to sign quietly and leave my life's work behind. "It's not personal," she added, the universal lie of corporate betrayal. "We're optimizing the org structure. You'll receive your standard exit package." I stared at her, not angry, not shocked, just hollow. I had stayed countless nights to keep our systems running. I had canceled weekends, skipped vacations, missed anniversaries and birthdays, even my father's last Thanksgiving, because the company needed me. And now the person deciding my fate didn't know anything about the system I'd built. She didn't know how many emergencies I'd solved before anyone even realized there was a threat. She didn't know my fingerprints were on every major contract renewal. She had no idea that the platform Nova Shield bragged about at conferences was born in a cramped office during the company's chaotic first years when we didn't even have proper servers. Brianna interrupted my thoughts with a bright, empty smile. "If you're uncomfortable with the direction we're heading, the door is right there. HR will help with your transition." That smile, cold, dismissive, rehearsed, did more damage than the words. It made my years of devotion feel small, disposable. I closed the folder without touching the pen. When I stood, she didn't bother to rise. She just said, "We appreciate your service." The same way someone might thank a cashier for bagging groceries. Walking out was worse than the meeting itself. My team sat outside, pretending not to watch, their eyes flicking away as if the act of acknowledging the moment might put targets on their own backs. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Loyalty evaporates fast when fear enters the room. The silence followed me through the hallway, into the elevator, out of the building. And as the doors closed behind me, it wasn't anger that filled my chest. It was clarity. They thought they were pushing out a relic. They had no idea what else they were pushing into motion. I didn't walk straight to my car after they cut me loose. My hands were shaking too much anyway, not from fear, but from the shock of how quickly a life can be shoved aside. Instead, I crossed the street and made my way to Harborview Cafe, the tiny place with chipped mugs and burnt espresso that had kept me alive through 2 decades of launch weeks and system failures. The barista, an older man with a voice like gravel, looked up when I walked in. He must have sensed something in my face because he didn't ask a single question. Just slid a mug toward me and let me sit in my usual corner booth overlooking the gray Seattle waterfront. People always imagine that getting fired after so many years must come with screaming or tears or some grand emotional collapse. It wasn't like that. It was quiet, heavy. It was the uncomfortable realization that I had just given the best years of my life to a company that replaced my sleepless nights and constant crisis solving with a folder and a forced smile. But beneath all that, something deeper stirred. Not rage, just a sharp, focused awareness that this moment had been coming for a long time. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle into me. My phone buzzed several times, coworkers sending polite, scared little messages that sounded more like condolences for a distant relative than concern for someone who had held their hands during 100 late-night emergencies. So sorry to hear. Hope you're okay. Let's keep in touch. They weren't bad people. They were frightened ones. Everyone at NovaShield had been living under Brianna's tightening grip since she parachuted in with her MBA phrases and endless reorg charts. I couldn't blame them for going silent in that conference room. Still, it stung. You don't devote 28 years to a place and expect to vanish from its halls like a ghost no one wants to mention. I leaned back in the booth, letting the muffled cafe noise blend with the distant rumble of ferries. Without meaning to, I started replaying the early years of the company. Back when we worked above a failing print shop, using refurbished servers and folding tables as desks. Back when NovaShield was a passion project, not a polished brand for glossy tech conferences. I remembered the endless nights spent designing the first version of our data protection engine, my engine, because there was no one else who understood the architecture deeply enough to do it. Those early designs weren't just lines of configuration. They were the backbone of every contract, every pitch deck, every promise the company ever made to clients. And yet, somewhere along the way, the system became a buzzword Brianna could manipulate to make herself look innovative. The thought made my jaw tighten, but I wasn't going to spiral into bitterness. That wasn't who I was. Instead, I forced myself to analyze the situation the way I looked at security incidents, assess what happened, identify what was true, map out what I still controlled. What was true? They fired me. They blindsided me. They wanted me gone quickly and quietly so they could reshape the company without the woman who built the architecture getting in the way. What did I still control? More than they realized. Much more. A calm settled over me. Cold, steady, clarifying. I thought of the box in my home office closet, the one I hadn't opened in over a decade, the one I'd kept out of caution, maybe instinct, maybe stubborn pride. A grin tugged at my mouth for the first time all morning. They thought they'd ended something today, but all they'd done was trigger something they didn't even know existed. I drained the cup, left cash on the table, and stood. It was time to go home, not to lick wounds, but to pull the first thread that would unravel everything they thought they controlled. When I walked into my house, the silence felt different. Heavier somehow, like the air itself knew something fundamental had shifted. Rex, my old golden retriever, trotted over and pressed his head against my leg, sensing the tension simmering under my skin. I scratched behind his ears automatically, but my mind was already down the hallway, staring at a closet door I hadn't opened in years. I dropped my bag on the kitchen table, took a long breath, and walked straight to that door. It stuck a little, swollen from years of moisture, but when it finally gave way, the smell of dust and cardboard washed over me. On the top shelf sat the old banker's box I hadn't touched since NovaShield's scrappiest days, the box I'd labeled Personal IP Archive back when we didn't know whether the company would survive another quarter. I dragged it to the floor and sat cross-legged like I used to during those early all-nighters when I wrote the first version of the protection engine from scratch. Papers shifted as I opened the lid. Printouts, diagrams, scribbled notes in my handwriting from a younger version of myself who still believed hard work was always rewarded. I sifted through the brittle pages until my fingers brushed the manila envelope. No label, no markings, just weight, the physical kind and the kind you feel in your chest before a storm hits. I hesitated for a moment, my heartbeat giving a small anticipatory kick. Then I opened it. Inside was the original provisional software license packet, filed in my name, not NovaShield's, not on behalf of, just me, Melanie Carter. The date in the top corner, August 14th, 2009, hit me like a punch. That was during the chaotic period when we were rotating through 3 CFOs a year, losing servers to overheating, and clinging to one final investor who kept delaying funding. Back then, Rachel Torres, my best friend from college and now a successful IP attorney, had sat with me at her kitchen table, reviewing the paperwork I'd drafted while NovaShield scrambled to optimize its tiny legal department. "File it under your own name until they stabilize," she'd said. "You can assign it later if they follow through on what they promised." They never stabilized. They just got profitable. And somewhere between the Series B funding, the board restructuring, and the wave of shiny new executives, the final assignment of rights, the one transferring my proprietary protection engine to the company, fell through the cracks. I'd asked about it once, maybe twice. They told me legal had it in process. Then the next crisis hit, and I went back to coding, debugging, mentoring. I never pressed. I trusted they'd follow through. The room felt smaller as I flipped through the thick pages and found the clause Rachel had insisted I include. My throat tightened as I read it again. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, all rights revert to the original creator within 24 hours of notice. 16 years ago, I hadn't imagined the clause would matter. It felt like a safety vest on a ship that finally found calm waters. But now that vest wasn't just floating, it was the whole damn boat. I reached for my laptop, opened the secure folder labeled Legacy Architecture, and scanned the documents again to make sure my memory wasn't playing tricks on me. Everything matched. Every signature, every timestamp, every condition. NovaShield had spent 16 years building its entire product line, its reputation, its revenue, its future, on a system they never actually owned. And Brianna, she'd just fired the only person who knew that, the only person who could trigger the reversion. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from HR, another from one of the engineers who'd pretended not to see me pass by earlier. I ignored them all and clicked on Rachel's name. She answered on the second ring. "Melanie, are you okay?" "I need you to verify a clause," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "The one from 2009. Papers rustled on her end. She went quiet for a long moment, long enough for my pulse to rise. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled. "Mel, if they terminated you without cause, the reversion already triggered. The rights reverted the moment you stepped out of that building." I didn't breathe for nearly 10 seconds. Then the pieces snapped together, slowly, cleanly, inevitably. They wanted me gone. Instead, they'd handed me back the heart of the company, not out of kindness, not out of fairness, out of arrogance, and arrogance always has a price. The next morning I woke before sunrise, not because of anxiety, but because my mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. I brewed a pot of coffee, the strong, dark kind that could peel paint off a wall, and sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop glowing pale blue in the dim light. Rex lay at my feet, snoring softly, unaware that his quiet companionship was grounding me more than any meditation app ever could. I logged into the software licensing portal Rachel had directed me to and pulled up the digital reversion form we had drafted all those years ago. Back then, it felt like overkill, a just-in-case safety net. Now it was the most valuable document I'd ever created. The interface hadn't changed much, still clunky, still slow, still built for lawyers rather than creators. I reviewed every clause, every checkbox, every line of text, and when I checked the box labeled involuntary termination without cause, it felt strangely anticlimactic, too simple for something so seismic. One click, one upload, one digital signature, then submit. The screen blinked, refreshed, and a single confirmation sentence appeared. Reversion of rights initiated. It was done. With that one action, every version of the protection engine, past, current, future, was legally mine. NovaShield's multi-million-dollar contracts? Mine. Their subscription renewals? Dependent on me. Their entire upcoming product launch? Sitting on top of a legal fault line only I could control. I leaned back, letting the magnitude settle. It didn't feel like revenge. Not yet. It felt like awareness, like I was looking at the company from the outside for the first time and realizing how fragile their empire really was. By 9 a.m., the office was buzzing, though I wasn't there to see it. I could imagine it perfectly. Half the staff dragging themselves in with energy drinks, half pretending to be morning people, all of them scrambling to prep for the biggest launch NovaShield had attempted in years. They were hours away from presenting our newest security platform to TransSky Communications, a Fortune 500 tech giant looking to overhaul their data protection systems. That contract alone was worth over $600 million, and the entire platform, the demonstration, the technical showcase, the security diagrams, depended on my engine. My unauthorized, reverted, legally unlicensed engine. The irony tasted better than the coffee. Around mid-morning, I got a call from Jacob, one of my closest mentees during my years at NovaShield. His voice was casual, too casual, like he was trying to pretend everything was normal. "Hey, Melanie," he said. "We're starting the final integration of your module into the new build. It's weird not having you here." I didn't say much, just "good luck with that," in a tone that made him pause. Then I hung up. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was necessity. They needed to feel the edges of the hole they'd created. Meanwhile, inside NovaShield, Brianna was probably strutting through the hallways with that curated confidence she wore like a tailored suit, convincing everyone she was leading them to greatness. She loved telling people we were on the verge of disruption, though she couldn't have explained a single architecture diagram if her life depended on it. I could picture her leaning over the project manager's desk, saying nonsense like synergy between modules or cross-functional optimization, phrases that meant absolutely nothing but made her feel powerful. She had no idea how close she was to disaster. By late morning, messages started pouring into my LinkedIn inbox. Coworkers pretending to check on me, pretending to care, but really fishing for clarity. They knew something felt off. They didn't know what. The funniest one came from a senior manager who wrote, "We're hearing rumors you left voluntarily. Is that true?" Voluntarily, as if anyone would walk away the week before a major launch unless they were shoved out. I didn't respond. Not yet. Let them sit in the discomfort. Let them sense the storm coming. Because while NovaShield was tightening their ties, polishing their demo scripts, and prepping their glossy presentation slides, the truth was already ticking beneath their feet, quietly, legally, irrevocably. And I knew that when the clock hit 0, the fallout wouldn't be loud at first. It would be silent, then sudden, then absolute. They thought they'd erased me from their future. They had no idea I had just become the center of their entire universe. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I knew the first tremor had to be hitting NovaShield's legal department. Not because they were sharp, far from it, but because even the slowest systems catch up eventually. And sure enough, around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a forwarded screenshot from an old colleague in compliance. It was a nervous little message. "Did you see this?" Attached was a redacted email chain, and right there in the subject line, "Potential issue. Patent ownership discrepancy." I almost laughed. I could imagine exactly how it happened. Some poor intern, probably 22, over-caffeinated, working unpaid overtime to prove himself, was doing routine checks on competitor filings. It was a boring, thankless task, the kind executives assume takes no thought. He typed in NovaShield's patent numbers, likely expecting to see the company name pop up like always. Instead, he saw mine. Owner, Melanie Carter. I pictured his face draining of color, his highlighter frozen mid-stroke, his brain scrambling for an explanation that didn't exist. Maybe he refreshed the page 5 times. Maybe he whispered "no way" under his breath. But eventually, he would have taken a shaky screenshot and marched over to his supervisor with the kind of dread usually reserved for medical test results. The legal team must have gone silent after reading it, the kind of silence you get when you're trying to figure out who to blame before anyone realizes you were the last line of defense. They dug through their archives, desperate to find paperwork that never existed. They found the old provisional license. They found the clause. They found the missing final assignment. And they found 16 years of negligence sitting in their laps like a loaded weapon. Meanwhile, Brianna likely dismissed every warning thrown at her. I could practically hear her voice, airy and patronizing. "It's a clerical error. Fix it after the launch. We don't have time for distractions." She never understood the weight of the technical side, the way a single missing document could topple an empire. She treated everything like branding, optics, messaging, as if law and architecture bowed to confidence. But this wasn't a branding issue. This was structural collapse. I got another message from a junior engineer, just 4 words. "Is something happening today?" Oh yes, something was happening, and it was happening faster than any of them realized. Around 3:30, I got a text from an old friend in HR who I never expected to hear from. "Founder is here. He doesn't look happy." That made me pause. Marcus Holt, the man who built NovaShield from ambition, stubbornness, and a garage full of discarded servers, had not stepped foot in the building in almost 8 years. If he was there, storming through the halls, waving the patent printout the intern had stumbled across, then the internal temperature must have gone from smug confidence to full-blown panic. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pictured Marcus confronting Brianna, her perfect posture stiffening, her rehearsed charm slipping, her voice cracking as she tried to convince him everything was under control. It wasn't. It never had been. They'd walked into the launch thinking they owned everything. Instead, they were standing on a trapdoor I'd forgotten existed until the moment they shoved me through theirs. And now? Now the floor was giving out beneath them, inch by inch, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth was doing the work for me. The next morning, I woke to a sky so clear it almost felt staged, as if the universe was mocking NovaShield with a perfect day they wouldn't survive. I brewed coffee, let Rex out, and checked my phone only to see a flood of messages. Over 100 notifications from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some were confused. Some were terrified. A few were the kind of frantic apologies people send when they suddenly realize the person they underestimated might hold their future in her hands. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I watched the livestream link for the TransSky product launch load on my laptop. The camera panned across rows of polished chairs, glossy banners, LED lights, the kind of money-soaked tech event companies stage when they want to prove they're unstoppable. NovaShield had spared no expense. They wanted the world to know they were on the brink of a new era. The irony made my coffee taste sweeter. Brianna appeared backstage first, fussing with her blazer, whispering to the CTO, letting out a laugh that was just a little too loud. She looked confident, radiant even, like she believed the narrative she'd been spinning for weeks, that she had streamlined the company, modernized leadership, and spearheaded the most important launch in years. She didn't know the foundation of her grand moment had already been ripped out from under her. The intro video began. Animated diagrams, glowing servers, smiling engineers. "Powered by our proprietary NovaShield protection engine," the narrator boasted. Proprietary. The word nearly made me choke. As the applause faded, Brianna walked on stage smiling like she owned the crowd. "Thank you for joining us," she began. "Today we show you the future of data protection." She tapped her tablet, and the main dashboard of the system began to load on the LED wall behind her. Except it didn't. At least not the way she expected. The screen flickered, not with glitches, but with something far more damning. A pop-up window appeared, the kind written by lawyers who are paid too much to be subtle. Unlicensed use of protected software detected. Owner, Melanie Carter. I swear the room inhaled all at once. Brianna froze. The CTO's mouth fell open. You could have heard a server fan spin from a mile away. One of the TransSky executives in the front row stood up slowly, holding a printed packet. "This document came to us this morning," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "It lists Melanie Carter as the legal owner of the engine you're demonstrating." Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones came out. Screenshots flew. Every person with a technical background was already connecting the dots. I watched Brianna's face drain of color. "There must be a misunderstanding," she stammered into the mic. "We have full ownership." "No, you don't," a woman from TransSky cut in, lifting her own copy of the USPTO record. And we can't partner with a company presenting technology it doesn't control. Audience members began gathering their bags and leaving, quiet but firm. Professionals who had no interest in being caught in a legal catastrophe. Not applause, not questions, just feet walking away. On stage, Brianna kept talking, rambling, confused, desperate, but no one listened. The system behind her remained frozen on the warning. Owner, Melanie Carter. I closed the live stream. I didn't need to see the rest. NovaShield's launch hadn't just failed, it had detonated, and the shockwave was only beginning. The morning after the launch collapsed, my phone vibrated non-stop until the battery nearly died. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Calls from numbers I knew too well. Messages stacked so high I couldn't scroll fast enough to clear them. Even my email, usually a graveyard of marketing newsletters, was overflowing with subject lines marked urgent, please respond, and we need to talk. In the middle of the chaos, one name kept flashing on my screen. Marcus Holt, the founder, the man who once told me the company would never forget who built its backbone. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice came through raw, stripped of all the calm authority he was known for. Melanie, what do you want? Not, can we fix this? Not, how did this happen? Not even, I'm sorry. Just the question every person who's been cornered eventually asks the one holding the leverage. I didn't answer him right away. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end, pacing, papers shuffling. Maybe the warning messages from TransGuy still open on his desk. They would have told him everything he needed to know, that NovaShield wasn't just embarrassed. They were exposed, legally, financially, fundamentally. I'll send you terms, I finally said, and hung up before he could say another word. I sat at my dining table, opened a blank email, and typed slowly, deliberately. No anger, no theatrics, just facts. Bullet points, clean and sharp. Full licensing agreement for NovaShield to continue using my protection engine, $20 million up front, 12% royalties on every product built on top of it, 10% equity, voting shares included, public acknowledgement of my authorship and the company's oversight. Immediate resignation of Brianna Cole. I ended the email with one final line. This is not revenge, this is realignment. Then I pressed send. Less than 4 hours later, Marcus replied, accepted. That was it. No negotiation, no counteroffers, no excuses. They didn't have leverage anymore. I closed my laptop and exhaled, a long, deep breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me for years. That evening, I stepped onto my back deck with a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker across the skyline. Somewhere across town, Brianna was probably packing her office into boxes, realizing confidence doesn't outrank competence. And NovaShield's board was scrambling to rewrite its future around the woman they thought they could quietly discard. People will call what I did payback, but they're wrong. Payback is emotional. What I did was structural. When you've built the foundation of something, you don't walk away quietly. You make sure the people who take it for granted finally understand who kept the whole thing standing. And in my case, they learned it the hard way. Sometimes the biggest lesson doesn't come from the victory. It comes from the moment you finally see your own worth clearly. I spent years believing loyalty, silence, and hard work were enough to protect me. But life has a way of revealing the truth. If you don't protect what you build, someone else will claim it. What happened to me wasn't just a corporate slight. It was a reminder that being overlooked is not the same as being powerless. You don't need to scream, you don't need to humiliate anyone, and you don't need to burn everything to the ground. You only need to know your value, protect it, and hold your ground when it matters most. My revenge wasn't about crushing anyone. It was about balance, about letting consequences land where they belonged. And if there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. The real strength is knowing when to walk away and when to quietly hold the line. In real life, the lesson applies everywhere. Document what's yours, set boundaries, read the fine print, and stop assuming companies or people will always do right by you. Protect your work, your time, and your peace. And if someone decides you're disposable, remember you still have the right to decide how your story continues. How to get started today. Review one area of your life where you're giving too much without protection. Write down what you truly own, your skills, your work, your boundaries. Take one small action to secure something that matters to you. Practice saying no where you usually stay silent. If this story resonated with you, tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to share the video and subscribe.